Imagine you are in a classroom, presented with a simple but intriguing choice. You're given two pieces of information about a person named Steve. The first is that Steve is shy. The second is that statistically he is far more likely to be a salesperson than a librarian because there are simply more salespeople in the population. Despite the numbers, your mind quickly jumps to the conclusion that Steve must be a librarian. Why? This is the base rate fallacy at work, a common cognitive bias where we overlook statistical information, known as base rates, in favor of specific individuating details that seem more relevant to the scenario at hand. This bias appears frequently in everyday life, affecting everything from the way we perceive people to how we handle financial investments. Consider college students. Many of us have experienced stereotyping based on our chosen major. Art students might be labeled as edgy, while STEM students are perceived as nerdy. When we meet someone, we're quick to assign them to a category based on such shallow clues, often ignoring the statistical likelihood that they belong to a different group entirely. These snap judgments based on appearance or behavior often ignore the bigger picture, leading us to mistaken conclusions. The base rate fallacy also rears its head in more critical decisions, such as those involving finances. Imagine you're monitoring your investments. The stock market might show a temporary dip, prompting you to panic and sell off your assets. You're reacting to specific short-term information, ignoring the base rate of long-term growth that would suggest holding on to your investments. Overreacting to these temporary changes can be financially costly, especially when statistics suggest the trend will likely reverse. The consequences of base rate neglect aren't limited to personal decisions. They can also shape systemic outcomes, particularly in fields like medicine. Doctors, for example, must consider both a patient's symptoms, specific information, and the statistical prevalence of diseases, base rate information. Studies have tested people's understanding of probability in a medical scenario. They found that many participants, when presented with specific information about a disease, greatly overestimated the likelihood that a patient had it. The real probability based on base rate data was far lower. This is a critical issue in medicine, where ignoring base rate information could lead to unnecessary tests, patient anxiety, or even the wrong treatments being prescribed. But base rate neglect isn't limited to abstract academic experiments. It can also impact the world of marketing and product reviews. Imagine browsing through a series of customer reviews online. One person writes a detailed, glowing review of a skincare product, and suddenly, you're ready to buy it. This single, vivid testimonial stands out to you, while the fact that the product has an average 2-star rating slips to the back of your mind. That one enthusiastic review has hijacked your decision-making process, convincing you to purchase a product that, statistically speaking, might not be very effective. Here, the potency of specific information blinds us to the more relevant but less exciting base rate. There are two major reasons why we fall prey to the base rate fallacy. The first revolves around relevance. When given specific and general information, we instinctively place more weight on what feels most relevant to us, the specific individuating information. Psychologists argue that we often dismiss base rate information as irrelevant simply because it's general. We prioritize the details that seem tailored to the situation, and in doing so, overlook the broader statistical context. The second reason is rooted in what is known as the representativeness heuristic. This mental shortcut leads us to categorize people, objects, or events based on how closely they match a prototype we have in our minds. For example, if someone looks or behaves like the stereotypical computer science student, we assume they must be studying computer science, regardless of how many students in other fields fit that description. Our judgment is based on the individual's similarity to the prototype, not the actual statistical likelihood. This heuristic drives us to ignore base rate information, as it seems less compelling than the individuating details that align with our preconceived notions. While relying on individuating information is sometimes useful, especially when dealing with outliers or rare events, it can often lead us astray. In cases where base rate information is more reliable, focusing on the specific details means we run the risk of making poor decisions. This is particularly true when it comes to complex societal issues, such as racial profiling or stereotyping. Without the context of base rate statistics, we might make harmful assumptions about individuals based on superficial traits, reinforcing biases that aren't grounded in fact. To avoid the base rate fallacy, it's crucial to become more mindful of the information we're given and question the weight we assign to specific versus general details. This means paying closer attention to the statistical context in which decisions are made and recognizing that just because specific information is available, it doesn't necessarily outweigh broader trends. This shift requires intentional thinking, as we're naturally inclined to take cognitive shortcuts that simplify decision-making. By resisting these shortcuts and being more thoughtful about our conclusions, we can significantly reduce errors in judgment. One classic example of the base rate fallacy in action is the cab problem, where participants were asked to determine the likelihood of a red cab being involved in an accident based on witness testimony. While the base rate suggested that only 15% of the city's cabs were red, participants focused on the witness's testimony instead of considering the statistical likelihood, vastly overestimating the chance that the cab was red. This scenario illustrates how easily individuating details can cloud our judgment, even when base rate data is readily available. In another study, participants were asked to predict how much money they and their peers would donate to charity. Despite being shown actual donation data from others, participants continued to overestimate their own generosity. This stubbornness stems from our reliance on individuating information, what we know about ourselves, rather than the statistical reality. Even when presented with compelling base rate data, participants clung to their initial predictions, demonstrating just how powerful the base rate fallacy can be. In summary, the base rate fallacy is a cognitive bias that leads us to favor specific, individuating information over general statistical data. By understanding the reasons behind this fallacy, whether it's due to relevance or the representativeness heuristic, we can work to improve our decision-making processes and avoid falling into the trap of ignoring valuable base rate information. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.